So let's talk about when tyrants drop their masks. Now, recently, New Mexico's Democrat Governor Grisham has actually removed her mask. She's stopped pretending to care about freedom and liberty and has decided to go full tyrant and suspend parts of the U.S. Constitution that she doesn't like. In a pretty fascinating exposure of her true feelings, she has said that the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights are really not absolute, and actually they can be suspended whenever she feels like it. She also indicated that her oath to uphold the Constitution didn't really mean anything either. Now, while this might be tyrannical on its face, it is very helpful in revealing how many of our political elite actually feel about us. I mean, this is the little people, right? You and I, and our freedoms, not very important to them. Now, obviously, if Governor Grisham really feels that way, what in her mind would prevent her from suspending the 13th Amendment and reinstating slavery? I mean, just temporarily, of course. What is stopping her from actually doing this? In her recent, well-publicized announcement, she just wants to suspend a citizen's right to defend themselves with firearms, just temporarily, of course. Since most Democrats, and all who want to abuse the people who live in our country, they don't like the fact that Americans own firearms. I mean, this idea was celebrated by most of the elite political class, and yet not everyone wants to go full tyrant and suspend the Constitution. Many local sheriffs and others openly came out almost immediately, and they said they would not comply with Democrat governor's clearly unlawful order right now. And the citizen response was immediate, as thousands of local citizens clearly stated that they wouldn't comply either. Of course, the avalanche of civil rights lawsuits began almost immediately. However, as moronic as New Mexico's Democrat Governor Grisham might be, her actions really represent the public face of what most tyrants desire once they believe that they have the power to crush the little people, like you and I, who they basically pretend to represent. I mean, does anyone really believe that Washington State's Governor Inslee, or Oregon's Governor Kotek, or California's Governor Newsom, or New York's Governor Hochul, or Michigan's Governor Whitmer wouldn't do exactly the same thing if they thought that they could get away with it? I mean, all of these governors and plenty of other, mostly Democrat governors around the country, are eager to brush off the constitutional limits on their power, and they have long ago dismissed the rights of the people to resist their abuses. In fact, most of these governors and plenty of other local politicians have been making great strides at eroding the public trust and destroying the constitutional protections that most of us thought we actually had. Now, to me, it always seems weird when you see in a public display for all to witness the mask of pretense slip and the true tyrant come out. And sure, we've seen this many times before, but usually they're just a little bit more subtle. The absurd COVID lockdown theater gave many petty tyrants the excuse that they've always needed to expose their willingness to abuse the public with the first excuse, really, that they could find. I mean, nothing beats a scary-sounding virus. These people were giddy with their newfound power and the recognition that the media was so easy to control and direct to their will. Plus, they discovered that big tech would rapidly silence, censor, and shadow ban all who dare to question authority and speak the truth. Now, Governor Grisham has certainly made other Democrats angry, and not because really they disagree with her, but because she spoke the quiet part out loud. They are distancing themselves from her, again, not because they don't support her policies and agenda, but because she is admitting what they all will say behind closed doors at their wine and cheese functions and amongst their peers. You just aren't supposed to say this in public. However, you can't let the little peasants like you and I know the truth. And this is particularly true when the truth is so ugly and reveals your true face of tyranny and the disdain for our rights and freedoms. The Constitution? What is that? It's just a piece of paper on which to read and then mock when convenient. Although funny how so many of them rapidly rediscover its protections when they find themselves on the receiving end of an investigation or abuse. If it wasn't for the egregious failure of the public education system to ensure widespread ignorance in our society of just about key fundamental rights that protect their individual freedoms, there would be an even greater uproar, I believe, about the situation. And now, more than ever, I believe if it is worth revisiting a few key facts right now, because when the Bill of Rights was drafted, it wasn't to provide a list of privileges which the Constitution would, in theory, protect. And I know this is what our political elite want us to believe, but this is wrong, because the Bill of Rights, at least some of which are generally familiar to most people in America, at least a few of them, and the freedom of speech, the free press, freedom of religion, and maybe the right to keep and bear arms. No, the Bill of Rights was actually merely intended to enumerate the God-given, self-evident rights that exist for all people, regardless of whether a piece of paper exists or not. In fact, the only debate in America at the time wasn't whether these rights existed. The only debate, if you read the Anti-Federalist Papers at the time, was whether it was necessary or wise to even write them down. The fear being that if there was a way to abuse the public's unenumerated rights, then government would take advantage of that for sure. Very few Democrat politicians today would claim a desire to reverse the 13th Amendment and restore slavery, temporarily or not. At least I can't imagine any Democrat openly admitting this desire, at least for the last 60 years or so, since they were forced to reject the Jim Crow laws that were crafted by their party. And yet the same attitude that would give New Mexico's Democrat Governor Grisham the belief that she can just whimsically suspend the Second Amendment whenever she wants, that implies that nothing would prevent her from rejecting the 13th Amendment and restoring slavery if she wanted to do that as well. Now, I'm not aware of any politician in America today, not even in the Democratic Party, that would admit a desire to allow slavery back in America. And yet Governor Grisham's recent actions paved the pathway to do exactly that. Now, most people should be disgusted by what they're witnessing with our political elite today. It's an ugly thing to witness. And yet we should be thankful that the masks are slipping and that the inner tyrants are being exposed for who they really are. When the facades fall away, it is easier for more people to realize how our freedoms have been put at risk by the corrupt clowns that we have allowed to occupy these offices of our government today. Every person has a different point at which they start to wake up. Maybe you're already awake, and this is unsurprising to you. To others, you are just starting to wake up and question what you see. And to some, they are still asleep. But regardless of where you are right now, I suspect more and more people will wake up when we have complete clowns like this Democrat governor from New Mexico. I mean, I'd rather that the mask come off anyway. It is better for more people to discover the truth about their elected officials and the bureaucrats. The masks have concealed their inner tyrant for too long, and we might as well face the real problem today so that we can change the type of person that we've mistakenly allowed to be placed in positions of power and abuse in government. Now look closely at the people that you have occupying your local elected offices today. Are their masks slipping as well? You can only find out if you show up and start questioning authority for yourself. It is time for us to show up, because in the end, the future only belongs to those who show up.